Thank you very much, and welcome to our webinar today on Passing the Torch, Ensuring the Continuity of Your Work. We'll be talking today about how you can create systems and guides and documents that will allow you to ensure that the great work you're currently doing in the community can continue on beyond your VISTA service to the next VISTA or the next staff member at your organization. We are joined here today by myself. I'm Robyn. I'm a project specialist at Campaign Consultation, and I am joined by my team members, Danielle Ricks, who will be handling most of the technology for today, and you will probably see Sharon Rabb in the chat and Q&A, who will be answering your questions, providing resources, and managing that today. So I will turn this over to Danielle, who has some tips for participating.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Tips for participating today. Please submit your questions to the presenter at any time using the Q&A feature that's at your top right. And you can share tips, resources, and ideas with other attendees using the chat feature, and you'll also see that at the top right. The phone line will be open later in the presentation for questions and answers, and you can see the conference call line in the passcode there as well.
Thank you, Danielle. I am going to turn it over to Eric Powell, who's from VISTA, who is joining us today. Eric?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. As Robyn said, my name is Eric Powell, and I have the great opportunity to work in the VISTA training unit. Very exciting in supporting VISTAs and preparing for VISTA service, starting prior to the pre-service orientation that you all attended, and continuing to build those skills throughout sessions such as this one. Thank you for joining us today, and especially for investing in your professional development. We look at the year as one not only of continuous development and capacity building for the community, but also a year for building your own capacity and skills. We hope your VISTA year, with many more skills than you had when you started, continue to build off of those skills that you learned during your VISTA service. So I'm very glad you made the time in your busy schedules to learn more about passing the torch, ensuring continuity of your VISTA work, and now to turn it back over to Robyn to get you started.
You might notice that there is a poll open that's going to give us a couple of insights into who's joining us today that will help us with our presentation. So please take a moment to answer that opening poll. To agenda, we are going to look at how do you create systems that allows you to document your work so that your supervisors and others who are picking up on what you're doing after you leave can figure out, find the documents that they need to do work. We'll have some best practices to assist in your transition from you to whoever follows you and takes on pieces of your work. And then we'll also have talk about what ways you can ensure that your work will continue on, and what are some best practices for managing relationships, managing the tasks, and making sure that there are people there to support the work you're doing after you leave during your term of service. We are presenters, Suzanne Knisner, who will be leading us today and taking a look at all of these items.
Thank you very much, Robyn. I appreciate the introduction, and I welcome everyone to today's VISTA webinar, Passing the Torch, Ensuring the Continuity of Your Work. We are thrilled that you are participating in today's webinar, and we look forward to sharing some ideas, recommendations, and best practices for your work. We hope that regardless of where you are in your service year, you will learn ways to pass what you've learned and accomplished at your service site and in the community onto the next VISTA so that your good work can be continued after your departure. Today's webinar will share tips and recommendations gained from my own professional experiences, specifically strategies for creating systems, building relationships, organizational capacity, investment, and stability, and best practices. We will also offer an opportunity for Q&A as well as an evaluation at the conclusion of this presentation. Before we begin our webinar, we wanted to recognize that each of you is in a different phase of your service year, serving a unique service site. You came on board with varying levels of training and experience. Knowing that, the tips and strategies we are going to share today are those we hope will work within your service site, but there may be others that are equally helpful. The purpose of today's webinar is to continue the good work you've accomplished so that whatever opportunities and obstacles the next VISTA has, they will be able to carry on and strengthen your service site's efforts to alleviate poverty. And for this, things we came across during the presentation was a quote, which we'll show you in just a minute, by Thomas Edison, and it says, "I never pick up an item without thinking of how I might improve it." The quote illustrates the value of leaving it better than you found it, which is a strong component of VISTA's work. Started, the first thing I want to talk about is creating systems. One of the benefits of knowing the duration of your service year is that you have advanced knowledge and lead time to prepare materials for when your service year ends so that the work continues after your departure. One of the ways to ensure a seamless transition between VISTAs is to clearly label files and to include those labels for both electronic and hard copies. It's possible that your service site has a file naming protocol, so you should follow this. It will help you identify important files for yourself and for the next VISTA. If your doesn't have a file naming protocol, perhaps this is an area in which you can offer your assistance. Consult VISTA supervisor and find out if this is a task you can contribute to for your service site. If nothing else, develop a file naming protocol for the files you create. That way, you can include it as part of your end-of-service closeout process, and the next VISTA will have an easier time getting up to speed. Then talk about is identifying the file paths, specifically where the document is saved. It's a great way to help the next VISTA find important resources. You include the file path in the footer of the document. You can create a list of frequently used file paths, or you can establish a shortcuts folder. Also, for hard copies, if you work on a report, a brochure, a contract, or any other recurring deliverable, you want to provide the most recent version for the next VISTA to reference. Here's a good place to indicate the file path if there's an electronic version available. You fix a sticky on the brochure within the folder. If there's blank contract available, include that in the hard copy folder as well. Again, this webinar is focused on continuing the work, which means saving steps for the next VISTA so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel and are able to build upon the work that you've already accomplished. The things that I like to do in my work is to create templates, and if possible, you want to include these templates of important documents. For example, if you have a certificate or an award to use in your work, save this so that the next person can insert updated information without having to recreate the certificate altogether. Creating systems, I would recommend that you put an instruction guide. And I did this, I basically put together an instruction guide or a step-by-step instruction sheet for my team members to run WebEx webinars like this one. I was able to work with my team directly, getting them up to speed on running a webinar. In addition, I developed a step-by-step instruction sheet that listed how to run these virtual events from start to finish. It was a positive experience in that I was able to ensure my colleagues had what they needed to complete the task and were comfortable stepping into this new role because they knew that if something went wrong, they could go back through the steps and see where a step may have been overlooked. Continue with the creating systems. In a previous position with the Archdiocese of Baltimore, I created 2 documents for my successor. The first was an at-a-glance outline of sequential projects to include overall timeline and milestones. This next marketing associate an idea of what projects and events happened throughout the year along with day-to-day tasks. I created was a detailed description of current and upcoming tasks indicating the status of each item as well as how and when to start working on the upcoming assignments. For example, one of the things I worked on was the Teachers Award Banquet, and while the banquet itself happened in April, I indicated on this detailed description that planning for that needed to really start in January. So that's an example of how the detailed description might vary from the list of sequential tasks throughout the year. The next piece of passing on the work that I want to talk about is relationship management. And this is one of the most important things you can do in your own service year and to prepare the next VISTA to continue the work. You want to foster relationships between your position, the service site, and community. Some ways to successfully transfer the relationships you've cultivated to the next VISTA are document any and all community contact information for the new VISTA. You'll want to include vendors, nations, community associations, and friends you've made along the way. If necessary, please consider including any hints for how best to interact with these contacts. Does the person prefer to receive an email? Is another person likely to respond to a personal request or phone call? Is one person typically available during certain hours? Information you can provide to the next VISTA will aid in continuing the work. In VISTA, the contact information, you want to also let your community contact know about the transition, especially if the VISTA assignment isn't going to be filled right away. It will be good for anyone you've worked with to know that you're completing your year of service and that hopefully they will be able to work with the next person. Each VISTA will have to establish their own relationships, but you want to avoid them starting from scratch. Your contacts know who and how to reach your service site. They contact your supervisor in your absence, or at least should find out if they can. You know they might have an opportunity that your service site can take advantage of, but if they don't know who to contact, it may never come to fruition. This is a lifelong skill to learn now. Stay in touch with a few people from your organization and/or community. Build a strong network of connections is a vital professional development skill to learn and master. You don't have to keep in touch with everyone, but perhaps your supervisor or another leader you've worked with, as well as one or two community contacts that you've developed a rapport with. If social media is easier than ever to maintain relationships throughout your career. Some with the organization are to remain on the mailing list, events when possible, and to send a note to your contacts for important milestones. Organizational capacity. We've always hoped for the best, planned for the worst. In a situation, the next VISTA will begin their work at the conclusion of your service year, pick up left off, continue the great work you've accomplished, and create new pathways for the next VISTA, but more importantly, the service site. Well, if this is what happens for you in your service site, we all know it's possible, if not likely, that the transition to another VISTA will happen another way. For this, we recommend that you identify gaps in your service, your end of service date, and if you know, the next VISTA's start date. For example, one VISTA I know worked with incoming first-year college students, including a welcome event at the beginning of the fall semester. This VISTA service year ended prior to an upcoming event. She did everything she could ahead of time. She booked the seat, she secured the speaker, she confirmed the menu, she prepared the welcome packet, so that when the new VISTA came on board, all they had to do was execute the plans already put into place. To control the schedule, you can help identify any areas where service is paused. How to alleviate the transition between VISTAs that we're here to talk about today. The next is some things that you wish you had known when you started your service, either at all or within your current site. Maybe something as simple as where's the best deli, or net at the community center is a good resource for your work, or any insider tip that you've discovered along the way. Perhaps it's more personal. Something we discussed during our Living on the Living Allowance webinar was that VISTAs often discover innovative and creative ways to stretch their living allowance dollars. Do you know of any local resources, discounts, or freebies? If so, let a VISTA know. For some other WIHID knowns, consider putting together a binder of useful information. Robyn Stegman, one of our team members here, is a VISTA alum, and during her work with Michigan Community Service Commission, she created a binder for herself, as well as to pass on to the next VISTA, to use in completing service for her service site. The binder included background information on her organization. It had history and the mission and the employee manual, and then some other official resources that provided insight to complete tasks within the service site. Consider your community resources, relationship management, as well as systems. This is another opportunity to provide the next VISTA with helpful, if not vital, resources for the community. Where's the library? Is there a church or a fire hall that lets you host events at their location? Are there any identified speakers who are willing to volunteer for events? A community resource that can easily connect you to other people. I'm also going to talk about some best practices. This is actually my favorite part of the presentation. I want to create an at-a-glance document, a quick and dirty outline, if you will, of milestones in the timeline. Specifically, a essential list of projects throughout the year. You'll include daily tasks as well. You'll want to develop a detailed description or a more comprehensive list of current and upcoming projects, i.e. month-by-month milestones. You'll want to indicate the status of each item as well as specific details related to the projects. You also want to differentiate between when to execute versus prepare for projects. You want to preserve final versions of documents. Remove drafts that may be confusing to the next person. If possible, keep full versions of documents for updating purposes, not just the PDFs. You'll wish a running Google document. Use a Google spreadsheet or other preferred tool to track your assignments along the way. By documenting your tasks throughout the day, you'll have a great starting point for identifying items for the next person to complete. Include an out-of-office message with the service site contact information. When you're out of the office without access to email, it's a good idea to set this feature up. It's especially important to set up the out-of-office option when you vacate your VISTA position. You want to include a contact name and email address and phone number if appropriate. In the example of the VISTA who worked with incoming college students, sure that anyone contacting her over the summer received her VISTA supervisor's contact information so that they had what they needed coming into the new school year. Be sure to confirm this contact name with your VISTA supervisor. And contact is someone other than your supervisor. Make sure that you've let the identified person know so that they're not surprised if anyone reach out to them in your absence. And be sure to include a message on your voicemail and, where possible, social media outlets. Focused on continuing the work to alleviate poverty, which means saving steps for the next VISTA so that they are able to build on the work you've already accomplished. I hope ideas and recommendations are helpful when you complete your close of service procedures.
Thank you, Suzanne. And we're going to stop at this point and take questions. So I am going to first ask the operator to give us instructions on how to call in with questions.
We are ready to begin the question and answer session. If you ask a question, please press star 1. Please unmute your phone and record your first and last name when prompted. And to allow the question, you may press star 2. Again, it's star 1 if you'd like to ask a question. Thank you.
Great. I'll turn this over to Sharon. Do we have questions in the Q&A?
Yes, Robyn, we do have a few questions. The first question came from Lee McQuain. Will we talk about passing off our projects to staff or volunteers of our organization? I have no VISTA following up at my site after me. Do you have any recommendations for someone who needs to pass off to a leader when there's no VISTA?
Yeah, actually going to address some questions of sustainability later on in the presentation. But, you know, especially when you're the last VISTA at the site, it's really important to identify in the beginning of your service if there's a staff member or what the intentions are. Sometimes you are, instead of passing your duties over to a staff member, getting a group of volunteers who can do some of your work, or maybe looking at a grant to be able to hire somebody part-time. So it's something really that requires planning to really think about kind of the multifaceted approach. So it might not just be a staff member, it could be different of your service could go to different strategies.
have another question from Carl, who's a long way away from stepping down, and he wants to know, should I be worried if my supervisor and others are talking about doing this now?
You should not be worried. In fact, you're at a real advantage for participating in this webinar now so that you can create some systems going forward. It's never too late to create systems, but at the same time, you know when your service year is happening, the duration of it, so you can track what you're doing so that you can extend those projects to the next person.
And we have one more question. If there has been 2 years of VISTAs, and I don't think there are any bad VISTAs, and we are now in the 3rd year, all of us have been playing catch-up. What do you recommend to do to 3 years of work in 1 year?
Sometimes I think part of this is really being honest with the people at your site and sitting down and really creating some measurable goals for what can reasonably be accomplished in a year. Looking at what the parts of what the other VISTAs have created that you're able to incorporate, but then kind of making sure that you're making a plan for the year to really build upon, and it might not be exactly what 3 years ago the VISTA site had intended, but creating a plan for what you reasonably do. And also, I think this is where forward planning goes. Maybe you can't do everything in a year, but what you can do are some sustainability measures like creating a volunteer group that can expand your reach. So maybe you can't do everything, make up for 3 years of work, but you get a bunch of volunteers in the community or a bunch of community partners who can really help you and maximize. So it doesn't always just have to be you working on this project. In fact, in order to make sure that your project is building capacity and will stick around in the community, you really want to involve others. Building coalitions, kind of doing more outreach and maybe even doing some resource development so that you can get funds, looking at ways that you can attract some outside resources too to make sure that you can get the work done for your organization. And I know Eric is on the line. Do you have any other suggestions?
That was a great suggestion in terms of making sure that communicate, because it's how it goes about. But in addition to what you said, I don't have anything in addition. It sounded great.
Sharon, do you have any other questions?
That appears to be it for now. Continue if you have questions, ask them in the Q&A or post your tips and ideas in the chat.
Great. Do we have questions on the line?
Not time.
We'll continue. We'll have another portion for submitting your questions later on in the presentation. I'm going to talk about just a little bit about kind of that issue of continuity, which is what we're talking about, versus sustainability. So really, there's kind of different issues you're talking about when you're transitioning for VISTA. The first is continuity, which are making sure all your day-to-day tasks are not dropped when you leave your VISTA service. But there's also this idea of, as VISTAs, you're building capacity. And really the end goal of VISTA is that, once all VISTAs have left from that organization or that area, that you're creating projects that are being to be sustained by the community for the long term. So how do you, while you're setting up kind of continuity, also forward think and start making inroads to ensure that your project is also sustainable? So there's a couple of things you can do. First, to really start planning now. If many of you are at sites where you might be the second VISTA, you might be the first VISTA, you might be the last VISTA. Wherever you are in your service, you should be plan for how you can set up volunteers, put programs in place, create resources that allow your organization to continue the work of you and the VISTAs that are coming before and after you after your VISTA project ends. Also, to ensure, one of the big things is to ensure that all the organizational stakeholders and community are involved. Sometimes, a group can be very difficult, but it's really important that it's not just you in an office kind of plugging away at a community problem, but they are actually engaging others from the community and others from your organization in your program, so that other people are getting an experience, are involved and get to have a direction in the program, so that they feel kind of a part of that. So to work with your organization to really make a strategic plan. I think the biggest thing is to actually have something on paper or take some time with your organization to really talk about what the sustainability of your project is long term. Some of your organizations already have long-term plans and a lot of guidelines for that. Some of your organizations might have a less clear vision for what that looks like. As a VISTA, one thing that you could do is really help lead them in that strategic planning process. So what does sustainability look like? I'm going to talk really briefly about the four tenets of sustainability, which are four things that you can do to really ensure the sustainability of your project. So the first is volunteer development. So volunteers are really used to keep your programming running throughout the year. They can also be used to help manage and provide leadership when there's no longer a VISTA there to run. So one of the things that you can do is really work to create a volunteer force that can take over some of the things that you do. For instance, one of the things that I did when I was a VISTA was I helped manage the creation of community gardens. So one of the big things that I did was create a student group that was able to take over all of the running and day-to-day management that I had to do to start up those community gardens for when I left as a VISTA. This marketing and communication. So this is really important to make sure that other people know about your impact in the community. It also makes things, all of the other three tenets, so much easier. It's easier to recruit volunteers. It's easier to get resources. It's easier to build partnerships when people know who you are. So making sure that you're getting out in the community and making sure that people know about you and your work. And that really helps you develop resources that ensures the sustainability long term. The third, partnerships and collaboration. So, the more people you have involved in caring about your project in the community, the more likely it is that you're going to have the support you need to make sure that you can transition it after your VISTA year. Making sure that you're building relationships with other organizations in the area who work along similar lines, with other community groups, with your city government, with the kind of wide variety of assets that you have in your community. And really into your work and making that, and giving them kind of a voice in what you're doing as a VISTA. Last is resource development. So, you need resources, both money, other gifts kind of in kind, and so really thinking about how you can long-term help support your project. Sometimes this is writing grants and getting doing setting up fundraisers that people can do. It might be looking into how you can tap different community resources like a tool library in your area where you're able to rent the shovels that you need for a service project. Looking at ways that you can share different things that you need day to day, like maybe a printer with another organization. So looking at ways that you can ensure that your project is continuing to get the resources it needs to run. At this, pause and actually open up the phone lines again. And what we have to invite you to do both in the chat, but also the phone lines, is we've talked a little bit about what we feel are some best practices and examples of transitioning, but we'd love to hear from you about what was left for you when when you came in as a VISTA that was really helpful? Or what are you planning to leave for another VISTA? Or what do you wish you had when you joined VISTA from your organization or from the VISTA prior to really jumpstart your service? So could we get instructions for how to dial in again and dial *1 and share your resources?
Can we do Q? Stephen Wallace?
Yes, quick question. So if you are spending a lot of time with your project collaborating with other VISTAs, what would you say the approach would be to ensure that your projects go on with the level of quality that you expect without just kind of like putting everything on paper and leaving it for the next two VISTAs, since we all kind of come in and go at the same time?
Question. I think that anything that you can do to ensure the quality of work is as important as what you do to continue the work in general. I think working with supervisor to make sure that they have what they need to work with the next VISTA is going to be particularly helpful. Obviously, documenting and creating systems is one way to make sure that they have materials, but you want to make sure that you're working with your VISTA supervisor so that they have a firm understanding of where things are so that they can communicate with the next VISTA so their work can be continued.
Okay.
I think that, this is also where the sustainability question gets. So this is where, like, with the team of everybody that you're working with, if you have a lot of VISTAs in your office, and I was in a position where I was the last VISTA there, and so that's a challenge that not just the last VISTA should be looking at, but every VISTA, which is, if next year there were no VISTAs, how would you ensure that your organization and your community has the resources it needs to continue on that work? And that could be through a volunteer program, that could be through helping them get grants so that they could hire somebody at your organization. There's kind of a variety of options there. But I would also, while you're talking to your supervisor about how to leave systems, also make that part of your regular agenda to really talk about how you make sure that everything you create as a VISTA is able to be sustained beyond your year of service.
Okay.
Do we want?
Yes, the next question, I wasn't sure of the first name, but I believe it's Chapman Gunner.
Oh, I think that's me, Catherine Brenner.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, it just had to do with about suggestions and like what was helpful when we got started. Because I was the third VISTA at my site, and my previous person was very good at leaving me the contact information and how to read some of the people. Like, he told me certain people that I should text or who to email just to get in contact with them. But in terms of having a bar of information or anything, that, like, I don't have any of that. So there's so much learning right at the beginning. Like, my first month or two was really just like going back through his emails and reading stuff that he left for me on the computer. Anything like that, I would just really tell everybody to just make it as simple as they can for the next person. Because we luckily did get an extension, so we will have a new person coming in. But yeah, I knew that, like, I started my stuff for that like as soon as I started in the fall, because that just wasn't set up for me at all.
Well, I really appreciate you, talking about what, the previous VISTA did that was helpful, as well as, what you found helpful, when you got to your service site, and hopefully, that will be heard by others, and that creating a binder and, like, organizational information for the next person is always helpful so that you can learn the culture of the organization pretty quickly. So thanks for, letting us know that.
Yeah, a moment, please. Wallace, your line.
Been missing that they've been really talking about, like, the first, second, and third VISTAs. Is there any particular strength or focus that like a particular VISTA should be focusing on? For example, if you're a second-year VISTA, should you be focusing on something different than maybe a third-year VISTA or a first-year VISTA?
On to that one.
I would not say that there's necessarily any specific area to focus on. Obviously, you should be told whether you're the first, second, third VISTA, and in some cases fourth or fifth in limited circumstances. But really working with your VISTA supervisor and your project to understand what has been done, and the fine print is what's in your VAD. That's really what should be focusing your area of expertise and where your where all of service and work should be focused on. So say if your VAD is questionable, or if you're unsure of how your VAD relates to some of the work that has been done by a previous VISTA or will transition to a future VISTA or a staff member, definitely talk with your VISTA supervisor, and if they're unclear, talk with your operation state office, and they'll be able to direct you in the best way to go.
Okay.
Are we ready for the question? The next is from Brian. I believe the last name is Norris.
Yes. Hello?
Line open, sir.
Hello?
Hi, Brian.
Hello. I was wondering because in the beginning portion of my VISTA, the school was doing a lot of restructuring. So now that I'm going back, I'm trying to figure out how to set up like a something follow, considering that like the school's doing some restructuring, but it's pretty stable now. I could like kind of next VISTA forewarning, or that might not necessarily be there when the school changes again.
Any information that you can give to the next VISTA, particularly obstacles that they may encounter, would be tremendously helpful. And one of the things that I've encountered in my work is that we have systems in place for when the structure is a certain way, but when that structure changes, you have to reevaluate how you do things. And one of the things.
Hello?
One moment. Has gone quiet here. You're still connected.
Eric?
Okay, last speaking as far as the speaker?
I do not.
Okay.
Sorry.
That was Suzanne Knizner at Campaign Consultation. So I think she's probably trying to dial back in, and she may be in the presenter's holding line. I don't know if I can exit the Q&A and go
I
back in.
called in right now as a host,
Okay.
waiting. Was she anyone else? Because I don't recognize that name as dialed in before.
She's with Robyn Stegman.
Robyn. Okay, that
Yep,
must
they're
be
going
line.
online.
The line's still connected, however, we're not able to hear them.
Okay.
Wait here to see if they call back in. Maybe just a moment.
Okay, great.
Okay, one moment. Okay, I dial in yet. Okay, I'm going to try one moment, please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
To sort that out, maybe we can continue with some questions that have come in over the Q&A. A question from George. He asks, what are in transferring contacts to the next VISTA? I before had to forward a lot of emails for me to the first couple of months. So it's a great question, and it's one that can be ways depending on the types of systems you have and the type of email setup that you've got with an organization. There can be ways of archiving and saving a whole thread of emails into files that can easily be transferred, particularly because if the VISTA isn't there before you finish, there won't be an email account for you to forward them to. So one approach would be to save relevant email threads that need to be picked up and carried forward, to save into Word documents or some other format so that those can easily be saved on a shared drive or some sort of CD that can be easily transferred. Approach would be to have a generic email created. Maybe it's vista@ourorg.org or whatever your URL is, and then to forward those relevant messages into that generic box, so then the person can then go in and have access to them and easily respond and pick up the conversation. And the other way, I guess, would be to actually share an email address. I know some organizations email address for the VISTA members or VISTA leaders, and that email gets passed from one member to the next as VISTAs transition in and out. So it's another way as well. I think in terms of continuity, you're going to want to pass on those relationships. So separate from email correspondence, you want to just create a Word document or a spreadsheet that has a list of key contacts with their contact information, maybe a brief history of your relationship with them or your communications with them, and something key about what that person's involvement is, what resources they offer, or how they are helpful to the project. So could be several different ways of transferring contact, particularly if there's email correspondence that would be useful. I don't know if you have anything that you'd want to add to that around passing on contacts.
The only thing to add is when I was at VISTA, one thing I definitely worked on a lot was putting to of not just who in the I was working with about 70 or 80 different community partners at any given time, and so I had a sheet that not only included the date, time, and method of contact, but it also included the person's name and what their role at the organization. When I left, I passed it on to the next VISTA, so when they took over, they all were able to hit the ground running and at least get a general framework of who was who so that they could go ahead and start making connections. So if you hadn't done that, I would definitely recommend you trying to document and keep track of as much as possible the contact you have, because that'll definitely be helpful for the incoming VISTA.
And Andy, this is Robyn. We have rejoined the conference.
Great. Welcome back.
We're happy to be back. Do we have any remaining questions on the line?
One moment, please.
Hi. Great. So I'm going to continue on with our slide. I just have a couple of kind of tips as we finish with, from my experience, with how to transition out of the VISTA and certain things to leave behind. One thing to consider is not only how you leave documentation for how you do things, but also documentation for what you learned and what resources you access. So, for instance, during my first VISTA term, I had to read a lot to get up to speed about kind of the theories behind what were the best practices for service learning in an urban environment, and what were the best practices for service learning in a rural environment. So one of the things I did was not only leave binders for how to, but also for kind of different resources that I found particularly helpful. And this could be from anything from volunteer management to maybe some fundraising to, if you see articles about community building, that you find through Twitter or Facebook that really helped you and helped frame your service, keep a running binder that you might separate by category or might just have as kind of these first resources that could really help your VISTA learn the skills and knowledge they need to do their work. The second is to, leave advice that you have. I know people had put, a lot about understanding kind of the culture of the organization, understanding the community. So another thing to just consider is like what kind of tips you could do. And they could be like where to go to get, this baker gives Vistas free bread, or, this person in the organization knows everybody and anyone. And if you ever have a question and you just need one person to go to, call up Susie because she knows. Leaving advice like that, or things that, there's always in an office these unspoken rules. So, being able to say like, always never have anything outside of a lunchbox in the office refrigerator. So there's things that when you come in as a VISTA, you might have stumbled over, but could really help the next VISTA. Just also to make sure that as you're creating accounts and passwords, to make sure that you're recording all of that information. As you're doing it, you might not think about things like a MailChimp account or a social media account or how to access a website. That might be something that later on they might actually accounts that you don't use every day, but you use like once a month. As you're creating those accounts, make sure to keep a log, so if somebody needs to access that, they have it. Also think about how you can pass along more than just contact information. It's great to have a list of contacts, of relationships you built in the community, but oftentimes you're working with community members who you create a personal relationship with as well. And so you can really craft that relationship. So maybe it's sitting down and taking your supervisor out to coffee with a really important community partner who's helped you for that year. Or throwing a open house at your organization with all the community partners that you've met to get them to meet more people in your organization just you. Or it could be with students, introducing. Oftentimes when you're working with students, again, you're creating these personal connections, and so really being able to, where you can do kind of a face-to-face handoff versus just providing emails and names. Also remember, it's always better to provide too much information as long as people can find it. I mean, everything from emails that you send to things that, like events that you've received. I created a kind of quick binder of every food event that was in the city that I heard of. I put it in with the contact information so that people, when it came time to promote a project, they could look at what events were in the past and give a call up to say, are you doing that again this year? So, finding a way to save that organization. And then, of course, stressing really that your part of continuity is being able to plan beyond your VISTA term. So, as Suzanne mentioned, one of my VISTA sites, I had to leave, and they had a huge freshman orientation that they were doing, and were kind of looking at how you could do, like, get them into the service sites. And so one of the things I did was really, as much as I could, plan for that freshman orientation before I left my service site, so that my supervisor could go in and really implement that project without me. So thinking about, if you're posting social media, maybe what you do is you use something like Hootsuite to schedule Facebook posts to go out once a month, to keep that social media site active while there's no VISTA, or while you're waiting for the next VISTA. Or thinking about, you can get a volunteer, to volunteer with the organization over the summer to do some of the activities that you would have done. So be thinking about how you plan that transition. Great. I just also wanted to highlight some resources that you can find on the VISTA campus. The first is, if you go into the work section, you can see that there is a capacity building version of the VISTA campus, and that area has some really great resources around this idea of sustainability and community building. So that's the work section here, and then so the first one is just looking at kind of there's a project management section that has a lot of project managing tools, and then the capacity building can be found, I misspoke, in the community development section up here. So you'll see that there's an entire section on building capacity, and one that I really enjoy is the capacity building and action course that shows you a couple of different scenarios
of VISTAs who are looking at how they build capacity, and really walks you through how you can plan to, make that plan for action at your service site. There's also the 5 C's, which is a community building article, and there's a great interactive course here on the 5 C's that really walks you through. So as I talked about the tenets of sustainability, everything from how do you get cash, how do you create connections, how do you inspire collective action, so that you can make sure that there are resources for your community to continue your work after your site. So with a couple of next steps. So start a log of tasks and tips and connections. Oftentimes, like, get the year and you're trying to think about everything that you've done and everything that you've learned, it can be rather hard. So if you, especially to pick up some of those like minutia things that you're like, oh, that would be great for a VISTA to know, in month 3 of your service, and by the time that you get to the end, you might not remember that. So creating like a Google document or some document that you have on your computer that you log everything that you're doing, so you can so at the end of the year you can check and make sure that everything that you did for that organization, you have resources for them to be able to do again or expand upon, but also need tips. I think Eric also had talked about how he had a log of all the community partners he contacted, so looking at all the connections you've made. Work out a system for records. This is something Suzanne touched and made a great point of. So really work with your organization to find a system of recording your work that works for them. Some people really love hard copy filing systems. Some organizations, I'm sure, have shared drives, and so you want to think about how you can integrate your files into your shared drive. Or some organizations don't have any of that, and you might just even as simple as create a Dropbox, which you can upload all of your files online and make available to your organization after you leave. You will pass on and continue to be in touch with your best community contacts. So, really, again, a lot of your work is getting to know the community. So take time to really make sure that not only you are continuing to foster the relationship with your community partner, but also your organization is. So also identify who and how you will transfer everything. So as some VISTAs mentioned, this might be the next VISTA. Other people have mentioned you might be the last VISTA, and so this is somebody at your organization or somebody in the community. So, this isn't something that you identify into your service. This should be something that you're working on identifying from the beginning of your service. And then, make a list of things that you wish you had known at the start of your year. Suzanne started with this prompt, but it's a really good way to think about how you can pass on information, is to think about what would have been useful for you as you are an incoming VISTA. So again, for questions.
Thank you.
I just have one note before we do that. We are going to open the evaluation now. So if people have to jump off at 3, they can do it. We will be staying on until 3:30 to answer your questions. But take a moment to take a look at the evaluation. Thank you.
Like a question, please press star 1. We do have a question from Erin Noon.
Hello, Erin.
Hi. There's a little bit of a debate going on in the chat about if AmeriCorps VISTA is more of a very personalized journey where you have to do a lot on your own and figure things out on your own, or if it's collaborative effort. Would you say that that's just like we're located and some sites you need more guidance than others?
It's not as much of a dichotomy there. I would say that it's both. That there are some things that being a VISTA, it's really about your personal journey and how you're impacting the community. But I think wherever you are at a site, in a community or at a site, part of your role is to really enter that community and to collaborate with people at your site and in your community. And it's true that depending on the VISTA, there are some sites who you're not even working in their office, you have very little contact with, so you're really out more in the community, whereas there are some sites that you're day-to-day, working and kind of invested into that culture. So in that way, I think there are variations on kind of personal versus community. I always think there's a role, as being a capacity builder in the community, you should always be looking at how you can involve other stakeholders, whether that's students at a school working at, whether that's other community leaders, or whether that's people at your organization.
Okay, thank you.
At this time, questions from the phone line.
Questions in the Q&A?
No other questions at this time. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We are going to wrap up now. Please, as we said earlier, make sure that you fill out the evaluation before you leave. And please join us at our upcoming webinar. We have one on using your education award, so looking at how you can use your education award to manage student loans, and we'll be returning for another webinar on the work next month with one on mining census data to explore poverty in your community. This was actually with someone from the U.S. Census Bureau, so it should be very interesting. And for those who attended last month's with Dr. Stephen Pinter, it should be an interesting continuation of exploring how do you explore poverty and how do you measure poverty in communities across the U.S. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you next month.
Participating on today's conference. The conference has concluded. You may disconnect at this time. Please for post-conference.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.